Good evening, everyone. Welcome to week one of MLQ Replay under new management this year. Just kidding, Ethan can't make it this week. So instead, you have me, Ben Mertens, and Naresh Adala bringing it to you this week. Interesting week one, Naresh. We had three sweeps, but three, I think, interesting sweeps to discuss. The very first series, Saturday afternoon, Cleveland versus Toronto. Cleveland gets their first win over Toronto in 3 years, and in fact wins the whole series, a 3-0 sweep. What did you take away from Cleveland's performance this weekend?
Ben, the entire offseason, right? I was just like, do I really want to be involved in the sport anymore? Do I really want to do this, right? And I was just like, I wasn't feeling it. I really wasn't. It just wasn't there for me. And then I remembered Saturday at like 4 p.m. or whenever it was, just laying on my couch being like, you know what? I should tune in. I signed up to do replay. And I pulled up the stream and was watching Cleveland absolutely dog Toronto. And when I tell you that gave me enough energy to sustain myself the entire summer, that is how you kick it off. That was the perfect way to kick off the MLQ season after a very long off season. I know the joke is most quad ball players don't get off seasons. So for a quick turnaround for a lot of these players from nationals, I thought this was the perfect, best way, best result that we could have gotten to kick off this MLQ season in 2025. And my takeaway was this is not the Cleveland that y'all might remember. This Cleveland team looks poised. This Cleveland team looks ready for a lot of the challenges that they weren't ready for last year. I remember doing a lot of my talking points about Cleveland last summer was this was a very young team that looked kind of out of their depth. And now watching that team go up against Toronto, which had a decent amount of Team Canada players, and just hold their own, that for me was one of the biggest takeaways. It was the poise that they played with. And for a lot of this team, it was fairly young, right? A lot of them were Case Western players. And a lot of these players that you just don't hear about on the national scene. Like we can talk about, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Joe Lombardi. He is my GOAT. I adore that man. He had the series of his life over the weekend. And it wasn't just Joe. You had so many contributors from this team, whether it was Fiona Gaffney, who was the leader that gave them the energy to stay on the field. Just again, I go back to the word poise, right? It's just this constant leadership that these players who've been around this program for a couple of years now are finally seeing the fruits of everything that they've put together, and I'm just so excited for it. Sorry, I know that was long, but I cannot say enough about Cleveland. I cannot say enough about their players, and I think this was like I said, this was the perfect result for the way MLQ could have wanted the season to start.
Okay, so it brought back your love for the game in addition to being a huge moment for Cleveland as a team because, as mentioned, this is the first time they beat Toronto in several years, and they do a sweep. They probably, not officially mathematically, but in all likelihood, have already punched their ticket to MLQ championships, which is about as good as a week one can go. They did it in impressive fashion. Now, to your point, I think you used the word dog. Game one actually came down to a golden goal situation with Toronto having caught the flag to catch up for the differential in the game. But Cleveland just kind of built on each result from there. They won game three by 60 points in game four by 40 points. No flag catch in either of those games. And part of the reason there was no flag catch in game two and three is that Cleveland made what I thought was a pretty interesting decision, and I think a smart one, to essentially punt on flag runner on pitch. They mostly focused on blocking the flag runner. If they had a pure one-on-one, the other team's seeker, Toronto seeker, was out of the game, they'd have their seeker turn around and go for it. But they mostly asked them to block. Their beaters would come over and tap out Toronto seeker if they were in the area, but otherwise focused on the quadball game. And in doing so, they generated a ton of turnovers, held Toronto to, I think, 2 goals in the entire flag runner on pitch period during game two. And really they were able to open up a big lead in game two that way and put that game away. In game one, by doing so, they let Toronto kind of come back into the game with the catch, but they were then able to hold them off and beat them at the finish line, which, to your point, this is a very young team. They showed a lot of poise in kind of holding that game one off and then sticking with the strategy in game two and building up the nice lead to finish it out that way. On Toronto's end of it, what do you think the difference was this year besides just Cleveland being better? Are there things Toronto did wrong, mistakes they made, things they can try to clean up. Because from the flip side, Cleveland, we talked about, probably already punched their tickets. Toronto probably already feels like their season is in danger. This was on paper their easiest matchup. They have to go to play Minnesota, Chicago, and Detroit now. No easy matchups there. Obviously, this is a team that wants to get back to MLQ championships. So what do they have to do going forward that they didn't do this weekend?
Dude, I think it might be chalk for Toronto. I hate to be pessimistic here. It's just the team that came out this weekend. Maybe it was overconfidence. Maybe it was just, oh yeah, like we got this type beat, but they did not look good. Quite to be frank, they just did not look good. A lot of their goals came off of transitions, and that's fine. But when you're living in transition and you can't continuously, if you're living in transition, you need to have an advantage in the beater game. And we go back into the talking point about Cleveland and how their young players really stepped up. Adam Thompson absolutely dominated their minutes on the field. It was a mismatch from whenever Adam Thompson showed up on the field. It wasn't even close. But going back to the strengths and weaknesses of Toronto and like Cleveland and the strategic choices that were made, you would think that a team that was very reliant on a ball dominant quad ball player such as Brian Melchior would have an advantage in a snitch on pitch, flag runner on pitch situation where it's a bit more, hey, let's just go all out attack. Let's just try to use our strongest player to try to run through people. But that really wasn't the case. And as you said, they scored twice during flag runner on pitch in game 2. They only scored once in game 1. And I am a huge fan of Cleveland just saying, hey, we are going to score 3 more goals before you can catch a flag runner. And the flag runner was Jared Parker, I think. And I'm fairly certain he is one of the most dominant North flag runners that we've seen post-COVID. And I love that game plan from Cleveland. And that's where it's just the confusion, I think, that set in for me was I just didn't understand Toronto's game plan at points where you saw Austin Ginn catch this flag runner in game 1. He wasn't the first person out for game 2 or 3. These were things that I'm just like, if you know that this person caught, why not let them get as many reps as possible against someone that they've caught and that confidence is there. The other thing was their beaters and seeker just never coordinated attacks together, I thought, and that's where you let up a lot of scoring chances, a lot of not scoring chances, sorry. It's a lot of chances to get control back or take advantage of the fact that you had control and force the issue and beat Rose out of the play to give your seekers chances. But again, it was just a complete jumbling, I think, of they were half-assing one thing instead of fully committing to they were half-assing multiple things instead of fully committing to one thing. And I think that's what really beat them at the end because this was a very competitive series. And as much as we are obviously very high on Cleveland because, I mean, last year they were beaten 245-50, 175-80, 195-40. And now the fact that they've completely flipped the script and this was an extremely competitive series for a bit, I think really showcased that Toronto potentially came into the series feeling a tad overconfident, and Cleveland is much better team than they were. And I think that's just where we saw the clear differences between the strategy, the physicality of both teams. And we that's for me, that's where Toronto just completely missed the beat there.
Yeah, I think Toronto, obviously Toronto still had a chance to win game 1, and until flag runner on pitch had a good chance in game 2 as well. I thought during the first 20 minutes, as you said, they got a lot of goals in transition, and that's what I think they can kind of hang their head on for the rest of the season is they have a solid enough half-court defense, and when they get out and run, they're able to find those easy goals. Brian Melchior, as you mentioned, Nathan Reed as well, a lot of goals, a lot of assists, and it's easier when they have that head of steam. Their problem was when they weren't getting those transition stops and they go into half-court, a lot of just passes that either were bad passes and like were turnovers or passes that weren't actually creating anything, back and forth up top, not actually forcing the defense to move, and then eventually someone tries to go. A lot of miscoordination too, where their beaters made some nice plays on Cleveland's beaters to try to win control back, and then the Chasers have already tried to go are getting tackled and the ball's going the other way, even though your beaters made that play to win control back. So just a little better coordination between the phases of the two games could have given them the win in game one, where literally one goal would have swung it. And then to your point, they didn't adapt in flag runner on pitch. Cleveland had a plan. They stuck to the plan. It worked. And when Cleveland started running up the score, Toronto didn't say, okay, we need to pull the beaters back into the flag runner game, or, okay, now we can only win through the flag runner, so we're going to go whole hog at that. There were a lot of minutes I saw where Toronto's beaters are coming back and forth between the quad ball and flag runner game. Toronto's seeker is there, and Cleveland seeker is blocking them, but Toronto seeker isn't even really trying that hard to get around them and make a play on the flag runner. They're just waiting for the beaters to come back. If you're going to try to win on flag runner, you got to be go, 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 even when there's a defensive seeker, and then especially once your beaters come back, take full advantage of that. So I just think they weren't able to adapt to what Cleveland was doing, and that really cost them. What was a series that they still could have won, despite the fact that Cleveland was the better team.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? We were talking a lot about what Toronto could have done, but I really want to get into what Cleveland did, right? This was a team that I don't think anyone really – no, sorry. I thought it. I expected it. Give me my props. I said this. But no, Cleveland, this was a team that really, I think the story starts in post-COVID 2022, 2023-ish, where you saw in 2022 North champs that by the end of the season, they had something. Because they played Detroit that year very close. They played a lot of their North Division games, North Division championship games. In that tournament, they played them very close. And then you saw in 2023, they came back. Early seasons, they were getting blown out, not great. But then you saw in 2023, when they had to play in their last couple series, they started to look better. They started to really be like, oh, there's something here. And then last year, it was influx of a lot of young players, and you saw them getting accustomed to the pace of play. And now I think they've really reaped what they've sowed. And this team, and I just, again, there's so much enthusiasm here because I know a lot of these players from Cleveland. And seeing them finally get their due is super exciting. I already mentioned Joe Lombardi, one of series of the year, one of the best series for him personally, because he put up a 15, 6, 7 stat line or something like that, which was phenomenal.
15-6, yep.
An absolutely phenomenal stat line. But the bigger thing is the on-field leadership of Jack Mosley, who it was between Jack, Joe Lombardi, that would switch between the keeper headbands. You would have Fiona Gaffney coming in. You would have Peter Brechting coming in. All of these players coming in the chaser game. And yeah, all of their offense is pretty? Not really, but they had a game plan and they stuck with it. And you saw it come together in the half courts. You saw them making decisive passes. You saw them making passes with purpose. And I think that's the thing that we were talking about earlier, where just making passes for the sake of making passes isn't going to do you any good. Making passes because you have a player cutting, making passes because you saw a player with open space and now you have a bunch of shooters on your team, so they're going to let it rip. Like that is why you make these passes. You take that space, you open up these hoops, and you're letting your players just play the game. And that's what I think really opened up the game in the quadball game, because by the middle of game two, because game two's flag runner on pitch was 10-8, so it was 100-80. Post that, and especially game three, this was it was a dismantling of Toronto. And I think with Cleveland, a lot of people don't expect them to be able to hit as much as they can, but you saw a lot of the physicality show up for them this weekend. And even those transition attempts that Toronto got, you saw them all come together and play with energy to be able to get those stops and get enough stops to be able to completely dismantle what Toronto was doing.
Okay, and speaking of the head coach of the Cleveland Riff, Joe Lombardi, we've got him right here, our first interview of the night, so let's bring him in.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Joe, how you doing?
Doing well.
Congrats on the sweep. How's the team feeling after that big 3-0 win, the first wins you guys have recorded in a couple of years here?
We are feeling very good. We feel like we got the monkey off our back, definitely. This wasn't totally unexpected, but it's good to follow through and get it done.
What kind of was your approach, the first month of the season, coaching, getting ready for this series? What were the things you, as the Cleveland Riff, were focused on? What do you kind of want to build the identity of this team on?
We spent a lot of times working on fundamentals, just making sure we play clean. We don't have to come out our first series and play like some galaxy brained, like super strategy. We just have to play well. If we catch the ball, we make good passes. We cut when we're supposed to cut. Do all those good things. And then just really, we wanted to increase the pace from last year. We played super slow, so we wanted to really come out and be aggressors this year.
We were talking before you joined us about the decision you guys made to kind of mostly try to defend during flag round pitch and try to run up the score in the quad ball game. Is that something you guys had identified early as something you wanted to do? Was it based on who the flag runner was? Is it just something you think is a strength of yours, is physicality in the chaser game? What was the thinking behind that strategy?
We knew from the scouting report that they were going to try and catch the snitch. They caught all three last year. They were going to go aggressive for it this year. And then it was Derek Parker. So we were pretty sure that they weren't going to catch, or it would take a while to catch. So that was a fair bet for us. And then if they're going to put their beaters on the seeker, then that's going to open it up for us to run. And that's what we did. We just ran up and down the pitch, all snitch on pitch, all three games. That's how we won.
Was it hard to stick to that trajectory game one when it backfired is too strong, but Toronto did come up with the catch in game one, and that kind of led to it being that golden goal at the end there? Would you guys consider changing? Oh, you're like, we know this is going to work. We're going to stick with it.
No, we felt pretty good about it. The first catch took long enough, and Derek was good enough, willing to bet that was going to happen again. And then even with a catch, we still scored 6 before they could score 3. So we felt pretty good about it.
Yeah, Jack, I want to potentially get into the younger players on this team because for a lot of people, we just don't talk about Cleveland enough on the national scene. So I really want to get into some of the new players, I know you're the head coach of Case Western. How do you think that has, what impact do you think that has had on your progress as a coach, but also your influence and impact on these players to then make that jump to MLQ?
It was great for me to get to work with Case this year, just to refine my process, like how I teach things, how I sort of teach the way we want to play. We took a lot of what we did with Case, and we're going to do it with Riff this year. And just the whole influx of talent that we got, huge for depth wise. There's just more of us, more energy. It frees people up to play the way they want to play and just do their job. And Joe was cooking because Joe could just do his job. He didn't have to do 2 or 3 jobs. That was the biggest thing. Just a lot of energy, a lot of depth, and then belief. Like, these kids come in, they're hungry, they're fresh. They don't have the sort of apathy that sets in when you lose all the games. So they just believe. They were dogs all the way. They never let go.
Yeah, and I want to follow up on that because for a lot of these players who have not experienced losing on Cleveland or going into series where they're expecting to not come out of it with wins, how do you take that? I mean, yes, you're able to separate the newer players. They don't have that feeling, so that's much easier to deal with. But how do you work with the veteran players who have been with the program for a while, who have stuck with it for so long? I mean, for me personally, like Ray Barnes is someone that I associate with Cleveland from the jump because they are a phenomenal beater for the longest time, especially when they were in college, and then they played Cleveland, and yet they just never got the shine nationally because, again, Cleveland wasn't winning any games. How do you, I guess, create that inspiration? How do you inspire these veteran players to continue to come back and continue to just play and go all out?
I mean, you got to preach trust the process. We've been building things for a while. We've been doing a lot of sowing, not a ton of reaping until this past Saturday. And then just this series meant a lot to us. We know that we're a good team. Like, we know that we could just do a little bit more and get over the hump, and it's all going to be worth it. So people really gave it their all this past Saturday.
All right. Last question. What can we expect from Cleveland for the rest of the season? How are you guys feeling about the upcoming series?
I think we're just getting started. Like Naresh said, it was pretty sloppy at times. I think that's good. It means there's a lot of meat on the bones. So we got a lot done just by effort and physicality. But we're young, we're hungry. There's a ton of room to grow, and we feel pretty good about it.
Coach, congrats again. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, Naresh, that brings us to our second series of the weekend, the New York Titans versus Washington Admirals. As always, every single opening weekend on MLQ always has this series. I'm going to read you the scores here. Game 1, New York wins 185-90. Game 2, New York wins 155-90. Game 3, New York wins 205-60. Game 3 is obviously the one that sticks out, where if the flag runner had gone the other way, the Admirals would have been able to tie the score, and both teams would have been a couple goals away from finishing it. Instead, New York gets the grab and they win 3 in the quadball game. What stuck out to you in that, in the series as a whole, but especially in that more competitive game?
Yeah, so I'm going to be diplomatic about this, I think. I don't think either team was thrilled about how they played. I think for New York, they could have looked a lot better. A lot of these players are coming off of Nationals finals runs. They are playing at a very high level during USQ. And I just think that when you have a lot of these players coming back, again, a lot of these players have played together before as well on Titans. So it's just always, I feel like this is always the talking point when it comes to Titans is early seasons, they don't really look great. And then Champs shows up and then no one's stopping them. Or at least that's what it was last year. But obviously with the personnel change, I think that's for me, the storyline for New York is how do they bounce back from personnel changes from last year? They're not going to have John Jackson consistently at practices, right? They're not going to be able to build the chemistry in ways that they might have had last couple seasons. I think for me, they looked good when they were running set offenses and they knew exactly what they wanted to do when they wanted to set up Tessa at the small hoop or medium hoop, and you would run a hammered play, get the ball zipping from front to back to the sides, get back up top, get the ball to the side, goal is good, great. But then when you don't have that, I think that's where a lot of their half courts were still wanting more, I think. A lot of it, chalk it up to early season struggles, sure. But I think they just did not look as dominant as they could have. And especially, I think the storyline between Washington, New York is always going to be beater advantage that New York has. And there were parts of the series where, as much as you want to say that there was an advantage, I thought Washington was holding their own enough to give themselves a chance. And I think Washington's chasers were rushing plays often. And I think that's where let me slow down. When I went back and said, hey, like both teams came out of it feeling like they could have played better. I think for Washington, there were a lot of plays where it was either no dodgeball or one dodgeball, where the chasers were just running into transition and they were either shooting right at hoops and in a zone, or a defender was right there. They were running without other teammates running with them. And I think that's where you start getting into these like basics, fundamentals, that if you start cleaning this up, now you're looking at getting 2 or 3 goals a game that you weren't getting in previously. And that starts adding up and you start building that confidence. And that's something that I really want to see from Washington going forward. But I think with New York, it's just you have the players, you're gonna be fine. But my biggest worry right now is Ottawa forfeited, so they're not going to be able to use that to get development in. And my bigger concern is, are they going to have the ability or the reps to be able to be challenged until they get to champs? And that's always going to be the worry when it comes to a team that, in my opinion, might be a tier above the other teams in the East right now.
Yeah, when you're a team in New York's position as a defending champion and widely expected to win the division, even this early in this regular season series, right? You're thinking about what's coming down the road. They're already thinking about how they match up against San Antonio and Chicago come MLQ championships. And I think the way they played this weekend, especially in games 1 and 2, game 3 they did blow Washington out pretty handily.
It's week 1.
Credit for that.
I think we're all trying to get back into the thick of things. Ben, you're back.
Did I drop for a second? Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just saying with New York this weekend, even though it's the first weekend of the season, they're already thinking about MLQ championships, right? The way they're going to approach every series is how does this prepare us to play teams like San Antonio and Chicago come MLQ championships. So this weekend, they did blow Washington out in Game 3, which they get a ton of credit for. And Game 1, they won relatively handily. But Game 2 was close. And I think that's where their concerns can kind of lie, is would that performance have been good enough to beat San Antonio at MLQ championships, right? Obviously, it was good enough to beat the Admirals, and they got the sweep. But I think their goals are higher than that. The thing that sticks out is they went up pretty quickly against Washington. I think they're up 60-10 about 8 or 9 minutes into the game. And then they just really slowed down their scoring and let Washington kind of come back into the game. It was partly Washington stopped giving them quite as many boneheaded turnovers, and New York was really feast on that. And when it got forced into a half-court game, New York struggled a bit early in Game 2 and in Game 1, and then again Game 3 they had a lot of success spamming the hammer play, as you called out. But when they weren't doing that, when they were forced to work against Washington with 2, they did struggle a bit. And Washington deserves some credit for that. This is the first time in quite a while we've seen Washington actually try to run presses. Even years ago when these New York-Washington series were more competitive and would go 2-1, Washington was dropping their beaters and kind of trying to win on physicality in the chaser game. We saw their beaters step up, try to play over the midcourt line, try to attack New York before they even crossed half court when they felt the advantage to do so. A couple times they got caught out of position by doing it, but they also took possessions away from New York. You had a possession where New York just has to lob the ball all the way behind hoops before they even cross half court because the Washington beaters are on top of them. I think that was really positive from Washington. But for New York, try to do that to you. Boston's going to try to do that to you. So I think they just have some things they can learn from this series. And then obviously, as you called out, John Jackson wasn't there this weekend. They will have him later on in the season, which will help a lot. But I think overall this weekend.
Yeah, I don't know if y'all can hear Ben right now, but I think, Ben, what you're saying is absolutely correct, right? I think this is something that more teams should go into. Is Jack Mosley talked about it for Cleveland. He saw that they were playing slow last year. He saw that they were playing slow last year, and the game plan was let's just run this play faster this year versus for Washington, the fact that you were specifically talking about that their game plan was, hey, let's press, let's play faster, because when you have athletes, when you have athleticism, I hate when teams just sit there and not use that to their advantage. Play with speed, play with some pace, and you can always get teams, no matter how athletic they are, they can get frazzled when you press them and use that to your advantage. And exactly as you said, did they get caught out of position a couple times? Absolutely. But the fact that they were willing to do that, I think, is the biggest takeaway from all this. And I can't wait to see them. I can't wait to see Washington attempt to do this against other teams, whether it be in the regular season against maybe a Charlotte and Boston, versus how they match up to the rest of the country when it comes down to champs.
I'm hearing from our producer that my audio is fine, and you're just trying to censor my great takes, so don't do that again. Yeah, you're totally right. This is a different approach from Washington. They're under a new head coach this year, John Gaffigan. So I was pleased to see that. I also wanted to shout out Caitlin Brislow and Chantel Sidlors. They're two newer chasers, Chantel from UVA, Caitlin from JMU. Both excellent this weekend. Caitlin Brislow especially had a sequence of 3 plays in game 1 where she dunked on Zach Archer and was called beat before, so that didn't count. But then during flag runner pitch, dunked on Molly Potter, dunked on Lindsay Morella. Just her confidence catching the ball and immediately going, and instead of shying away from a hoop defender the way you sometimes see young players, like, I'm just going to try to go through them, is a tough thing to teach. That's just something that sometimes if a player has that confidence, then you're already way ahead, where with a lot of college players, you kind of have to build up that confidence. And obviously, this is the highest level of competition Caitlin's ever played against, being the first MLQ summer. So I thought that was really impressive. I think Washington is really excited about both of those two players. But I think as impressive as that was, as impressive as the beater was at points, the thing they can clean up is just the number of times that they had the right idea on offense and their chasers just got their arm wrapped when there was a good pass there, and they tried to take that one extra step, let themselves get wrapped, and then the pass goes awry or their hand gets dragged down and the ball just kind of pops loose. If they can get a little better hitting that pass, 1 second earlier, I think they're in really good shape because the looks were there. And then the second thing is just they're adapting to a new system. You saw a much more structured offense than we've kind of seen from them in certain past years, where they were trying to attack New York's tree zone. And the thing that I think was hurting them a little bit is Washington was doing the right thing against trees, drag the point defender one side, pass to the other side, that person goes, except New York was having their second beater stand behind the hoops, and Washington's 2 other chasers are back there. and New York Spirit can just turn and veto them. So all of a sudden, you're in a position where you have no passing option behind. The person who just passed you was covered by the keeper, so you just kind of have to go at the hoops, and you saw them take shots that got blocked, or the beater steps up and taps them out. Sometimes it worked because they ran hammer off it, or they were even able to get all the way to the hoops. But with someone like Tessa Mullins or her just standing back there taking those passing options, the adaptation Washington's offense has to make is to move those chasers in reaction to where those back beaters are, and that's going to open things up for them.
Shout out Tessa and Vinny for getting married, and it's no longer Tessa Mullins, Ben. Part of the offseason.
I'm sorry, Tessa Chico. There was a video and everything.
But no, it's, I mean, yes, 100%, as you said. They were, I think with Washington, they were executing 90%, 95%, but it's the last couple bits that really, once they figure it out, as you said, they'll be fine. And this is something that I want to get into when we start talking about Houston versus Kansas City. I think when you are in a situation where you have beaters that are playing split in a top-down set with the back beater playing in the backside of the hoops as far as they are, run your offense from the top side. Force that beater to step into play even just once or twice, because if you run that offense from the top side, now you're getting the defense out from what they want to do, and now you're the ones dictating pace. I think too often as you said, the chasers just immediately run to the backside because that's what they've practiced and are used to. But we do need to be able to adjust and run the exact same offense, except start it from the top side. And you now isolate the middle beater, that top side beater. Now, instead of it being a 1, 2, 3, 4, so instead of it being a 5v3, now it ends up being a 6v5, and you have the numbers advantage, right? Because even if you have control, if you have that back beater playing that far deep because they're expecting the deep pass, get them out of the play, force the topside beater to contend with two offensive beaters if they're trying to get control back, and now you have a ton of space with the numbers mismatch, and now you're able to get the looks that you want and force the backside beater out of the play. Because if you are playing for the attack on the medium side or the small hoop side or the medium hoop side, now the tendencies start to form, and now Tessa or Vinny or Kellen or whoever the Titans beaters are, they might start cheating to one side or the other. Now you can take that advantage, and then once that beater commits to one side, get the chaser from the backside to fill that space, and now you're able to exploit what the defense does, and you're able to do all that by taking advantage and forcing the defense into doing stuff they don't want to do. I think that's not just a Washington thing. I think that's a overall MLQ teams thing. We talked about it with Toronto. It's just a lack of adjustment sometimes. And I think that's where it can get difficult for teams when they don't have these non-playing coaches who are able to be cognizant of that and make those adjustments as needed.
All right, that's enough on Washington. New York did sweep this series. Any other thoughts on the Titans?
I think this team is going to be very, very good again, and I think a large part of that is their flag runner on pitch game. The fact that this weekend you saw Mo Haggad come out and say, "Hey, I'm a dog," and come out and catch all three flags is remarkable, and that's not including if they can throw Mo out there, Team USA seeker, Leo Freed out there, Team USA player, Team USA seeker. They have Vincenzo. Holy crap! Sorry, they have Vincent Iannucci who can go out there and play seeker. They have Kellen Cupid that can go out there and play seeker. They have an abundance of riches, and it is absolutely insane how many different types of looks they can throw out. And also, they have Matt Cooper out there, who's Honda's first MLQ team in his time playing, and he's also a very solid seeker. So it's one of those things where they have so much depth and talent that this team, the sky's the limit for this team, and I'm excited to see what they can do because they have a good influx of young players again, and it's a very high talented team that I think will produce a lot of exciting games as they keep playing.
Yeah, I thought New York was very strong overall. They struggled through their entire depth. Remains to be seen if that's something they plan to do all season, if that was just because it's early in the season. But they played everybody. They got good looks at everybody. The offense was really spread around. They got great production out of Molly Potter from a scoring perspective. She and Lindsay Morella connected on a couple of they were able to turn nothing into something, which was really good. They got obviously Leo Freed was kind of all over the pitch with the stops. There were multiple plays where Washington did the thing that everybody does. He has a really long arm and he can jump really high, so that's not going to work. And he was able to just pull those down. So they got good performance up and down the roster. Game 2 was closer than you would have liked, but they obviously put it away. Mohagat caught the flag really fast in that game, as you called out, and then just put it away. And then Game 3, they just steamrolled them. So I think we are ready to bring on. I think we're ready to bring on our second interview.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's bring on the coach. Do we have Jacob now? Hey, Jacob, welcome. Congrats on the sweep.
Thanks.
So this is your taking over as head coach, but of the team as defending champions, pretty high expectations. What's the focus been kind of early in the season as you prepared for this first matchup, but also for the season as a whole?
Yeah, so for us, right, even though we won champs last year, that was great. Our goal is to come out and try and win again, but it's sort of like starting from zero, right? This is a different leadership group. As Naresh mentioned, like some personnel changes that we have. So, right, we're all about right now trying to find the chemistry that we need, trying to find the styles and the way that we want to play, and going from there.
We obviously harped a little bit on Game 2 being close. Is that something that's frustrating, or as a coach, you love early in the season getting tested a little bit and being able to learn from that experience?
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys were right. I think Game 2 got away from us a little bit, especially in the probably like second third of the game. But for me personally, right, that's good, right? We want some adversity, especially early in the season. We've had Titans teams that I've been a part of in the past where we haven't really had adversity going into champs, and then we kind of get hit in the mouth when we get there against like these teams that are much more prepared and where we have to play a lot closer games. So, right, for me, it was good that, right, we had at least a little adversity early on, and that we were still able to, at the end of the game, stabilize and close it out.
You guys ran, I think, that trees defense the entire game. Is that something Washington specific, or was it just something that you think kind of fits the personnel of your team best?
Yeah, so for me coming into this season, one of my goals was for us to be really diverse on defense strategically, what we could do. Right, I think for Washington, we played, as you guys saw, this trees defense, but right, we have some other stuff in our back pocket that we just didn't really feel the need to show. And so one of my goals, at least for the season, is that we can adjust based on the opponent and based on what's working at the time. I think right, one of the advantages that we have is that both Jack and I are non-playing coaches, and so I think not just on defense we were able to make adjustments in the Washington series, but also, right, Washington threw us some looks on their defense. So when we were attacking on offense, that we were less expecting. I think you guys pointed out that press a little bit. We were expecting sort of a different style of pressing from them, instead of what they actually showed. But right, we were able to sort of pick it up pretty fast, and I think by the time they ran the second play, right, we were more or less adjusted to it.
With a team like this that really you seem to go 21 deep, do you have your rotations kind of mapped out from the start, or were you kind of adjusting on the fly and seeing like, I think this player is going to do better because Washington's doing this, or I want to see how these two players come together? How much of that is like experimenting versus how much do you already feel like we have the lines that we're planning to play?
I mean, I'd say going into this series specifically, the coaching staff, we were pretty confident on, what lines we wanted to run. And we more or less stuck to that with a little adjustments here or there, especially, sometimes people need a sub earlier than you might be expecting or something like that. But I think in general, right, our lines are not set for the season, right? We're still experimenting with who works with what, but, we wanted to, at least in the Washington series, sort of maximize people's reps with those sort of lines we set up ahead of time so that we could sort of like see as much as we could of it and not sort of like abandon it early or anything.
Jacob, this I think is almost a long time coming. For those who don't know, Jacob and I have been on the same coaching staff for years now. So seeing him be so practical in times where potentially myself can get very emotional, I think it is a really good balance to have on a coaching staff. Now you're the head coach. Now you're having to deal with a lot of personalities. How do you balance the ability to take players that might not be around all the time and incorporate them into the system and program that you're wanting to put together, while also letting them just play their game? Because sorry.
No, you can finish your question. Sorry. Go ahead.
Because I think the reason why I asked that question is because oftentimes we saw with New York is they often are stuck with one style of play, and that can get very predictable at points, and that's relying on that's relying on your personnel being very, very good, and that might not translate well to potentially players that don't have that same level of experience. So I think, how do you balance the high level of talent you have with a high level of potential that you have, and being able to get that mixed together?
Yeah. So for me, it's all about one. My coaching style is like I generally try not to dictate to players like a cookie cutter way of playing, or like that it's a recipe and like you have to do these moves in this specific order. And so right, a lot of it is like trusting them and trusting what got them to this place to start with. Right, we have a very competitive roster just to make our 30. We have people on our practice squad who I think would make a lot of MLQ teams elsewhere in the country. And so, right, the style that I try to do with coaching is it's sort of like taking the players along on the journey with you, right? So explaining to them why we're doing the things that we're doing, getting feedback from them, or trying to get feedback from them consistently, right? Like, does this make sense to you? Where are the holes that you see, right? Like, let's workshop it together. So that way, when they go out on the field, right, they have a fuller and better understanding of what we're trying to do. I think, as I mentioned earlier, right, like sort of getting away from like being stagnant strategically, right? Like our goal for the year is to be defensively diverse, be able to pull out different things just so we're not predictable. And so, right, those are sort of the goals that we're aiming for the season.
Okay. I think we're good for this interview. Thanks again, Coach. Congrats again on the sweep. Good luck the rest of the season.
I think so.
All right, Naresh, that brings us to the final series, which was the series of the week and lived up to it. It was a sweep, but by far the most competitive of the three series we watched this weekend. Kansas City gets the sweep over the newly christened Houston Legends. They win game one, 140 to 115. Game two comes down to a golden goal. They win 155 to 140. And game three, they win 155 to 100. So three very competitive games. Ethan, who's not here, messaged us that it's always sad when you see a series that's this close but ends up being a sweep, because in terms of just how competitive it was, it felt more like a 2-1 series. But Casey does get out of there with the sweep. What did you see from Kansas City that led to them coming out with the win in this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, going into the talking points, I really think that when you look at the rosters on paper, you very much saw one team potentially have the advantage in the beater game. And I think a lot of people expected that to be Kansas City. But as much as, again, we want to say there was an advantage, I think there were moments where Kansas City's beaters definitely stepped up and helped their case. But I don't think there was the advantage that everyone thought there would be. And I think that's a testament to how well programmed League City's beaters were in terms of setting up the offenses to get the looks that they wanted. For I think Kansas City, they looked really good, and they were able to capitalize on the loose ball situations. I thought that was my biggest takeaway. It was the hustle. It was the ability to get multiple looks, where you sometimes didn't see that from League City. It was either one pass, two passes, and they were getting beat out, or nothing else was happening. Versus Kansas City, they were ripping a lot of shots. They were able to get loose balls. And even when those passes were sailing players, they were the first ones to get there and continue those offenses. And I think for me, that hustle this early in the season is something that is extremely good, because you're only going to build on top of that. And as you start playing these games, your overall style of play is going to get a bit more refined. I think something else from Kansas City that I took away was their shooting. Everyone on this team can shoot. It is so much fun to watch. And I think the other thing that really the biggest takeaway for me was I wanted to shout out all the women on Kansas City, because they were unafraid to drive. And yeah, did they take like, yeah, I probably would have been like, oh, that was a good shot. But the fact that the confidence, the ability to take that space is a lot harder to teach than it is for something else. So Brooke Irwin, I think, is the person that I really was like, no one really knows who Brooke Irwin is outside of the Kansas City area-ish on the national scene. But the fact that I saw multiple times Brooke Irwin take that ball and just drive into space and take a shot on a hoop that might be covered, but they were right. It's like what we talked about at Washington. They were right there. One different move, one beater that stayed in the play for a slight longer to make that tap. Now the hoop is open. Now Brooke Irwin's shooting. Right? Like these are things we expect from Lauren Smith. These are things we expect from Janessa Deuce. But like from Brooke Irwin, who not many people know about, this is the type of culture that I love seeing. The fact that all of these players seem to be bought in on the type of offense that they are running. That's the part where I am excited for because they're letting their playmakers play make. And I think that's a lot of what these players and teams on for so long in the sport just got away from. Or no, not got away from. That's the wrong word. It's they continue to do so and not evolve because I think for the longest time in this sport, it was quite literally give the ball to your biggest and strongest person, let them try to run through people. And we saw it with Toronto this series. And we spoke about it with Toronto this series. But now you're seeing players be in positions to succeed without having to do all of this driving. Now you're seeing all of these players get involved. Every single person has a role, and they're not limited to that. And I think that's the part that excites me about Kansas City a ton because a lot's been said about how Riley Usami is no longer on this team. Ryan Mejio is not on this team. But I think, yeah, having them is great, but I think this elevates everyone else because now they're forced to step up. And I think this weekend we saw them step up when they needed to, and they got 3 clutch wins. And that's
to jump on what you were saying, Naresh, there was a good division of responsibility, I felt like, from Kansas City. In transition, which they got a fair amount of transition in the series, that's when they let Nivs, Jackson Herdade, Vincent Reyes, who's the leading scorer in MLQ right now with 17 goals. They let those players run and try to just get through defenders when they know beaters back, get right to the hooper, make one pass. When they saw that it was a set half-court offense, that's when we saw Lauren Smith handling the ball a lot and did a really good job moving the pieces around, getting into a flow on offense, moving the players to the right spot, and then swinging the passes rather than just saying, this is our best driver and we're going to run through them. They moved it around, had other players do the distributing and kind of set up players like Vincent Reyes off ball more. Jackson Herdade as well off ball, and we saw them get a lot of good results that way. So I like that plan a lot from Kansas City. And the flip, as you mentioned, I thought League City, again, this could have been a 2-1 series, and the big storyline coming in for League City was no Hayden Boys, no Swathi Manam, and no in the beater game, no Valdemar Nunes, who's moved on to San Antonio as well. And how are they going to recover from that? I thought talent-wise, this still looked like a very talented Houston team. They came up with a lot of big hits. Their beaters were stepping up and making plays. Usually I thought in the smart way, there were a couple, like every beater is going to have plays where they kind of made the wrong decision, but a lot of plays where they're stepping up, making the right exchanges, even if they missed, which is what I always try to look for beaters is, was that a smart decision? Did you make the 70-30 throw and you just got unlucky? I thought the decision-making process and kind of individual sequences like that was good, but the team-wide decision-making process wasn't there. This team had a really coherent plan on offense last year that mostly ran through Hayden and Swathi, but it's a plan that you could replicate with other players. And they didn't really seem to do that. There was just a lot of formless offense, a lot of moving the ball back and forth, a lot of trying to drive through the point defender without moving Kansas City's defense around first. And I think where you saw that kind of the most was in game 2. It was a goal situation. Houston got a stop and then called their timeout, which was a brilliant coaching decision. Save the timeout for when you most need it and you have time to drop a play. And then the look they end up getting out of that is they move the ball twice. Someone tries to drive and takes a shot off like their back foot that goes right into the chest of a Kansas City defender just standing on the hoop. That can't happen with the game on the line, but it can't really happen at any point in the game. You have to consistently be generating better offense than that. And I think that was what cost them from winning one game or even possibly taking the series because they had chances. They also got transition opportunities and punched home a lot of those. But the half-court offense was just formless and led to a lot of missed opportunities that are also then turnovers for Kansas City on the other way, right? It's not just, we threw away the possession. You're also setting up the other team for the easiest looks they're going to get. So I do think this is a League City team that we can see improve as the season goes along with this new coaching staff, but definitely a frustrating start to get swept in a series that they probably think they should have had.
Yeah, I mean that's the frustrating part. I think when we talk about these games, where it's like on paper you see it as a 3-0 loss, and it's like, yeah, that's Houston. That's normal. It is what it is. But then you actually look at the scores, you look at the games, and you see how competitive this series was. And I think that's where Houston, I think, just gets very unfortunate with how the final result ended up being. But I think the takeaway is you had you have the baseline. Now it's all about building off of that because you're making champs anyway. The goal is to show up at champs and prove that you belong with the rest of the country. Because they've been talking a lot about how if Houston had made champs the last couple of seasons, they would have gone far. Now is their chance to prove that. And the only way to do it is there's no pressure on you. Like, yeah, you could lose every game in the South this season and still make champs. And that's what we were talking about with New York earlier and Washington earlier. Use these games to show up to champs and get better. And that's all that really matters. With League City, I think my biggest thing with League City is when they, again, it goes back to being decisive. When they were decisive, there were moments where they were able to run Kansas City's defense and take advantage of those space manipulation, as I was talking about in the New York series, where if you could, when they were able to get the ball to the sides of the field, make the pass to the one side, draw the beater to them, and then kick it off to the opposite side, they had wide open looks. Their ability to run a hammer is pretty solid, where you saw Connor Mason and Gabby Lopez step up and just rip a beat at small hoops, and the timing was so well done where that chaser was already moving to the ball and then ripping a shot right through the small hoop or medium hoop. And I think the biggest thing is I adore the Mallory Hughes defense, and whenever she runs offense and defense, it's I think that's when League City looks their best. I am a huge fan of Mallory. Working with her last summer, it was phenomenal. Her ability to continuously get better is remarkable, and I think she is someone that, again, does not get talked about enough nationally, and especially with the loss of Swathi Manam. Now you're really going to see the ball in Mallory's hands a bit more, and I think you'll see that she is someone that can create plays for the playmakers on this team, right? And I think that's where it'll be interesting to see how the division of labor comes into play, because last year it was the Hayden Boys show. And for this year, we were talking about how Kansas City was able to create separation with everyone and able to generate multiple looks with everyone. But now with Houston, with the loss of their star player from last year and their primary goal scorer, who steps up in that role, right? And I think that's the question mark for me continuing the rest of this season, because Andrew Acosta, superstar in the making. You saw how much point defense he was able to make in transition attempts. That little spin move he's got, like all of that is a lot of fun. But is that consistent? Is that something that you can do and take between each series? And I think for me, that's what Houston will have to prove. And I think the other thing is, you mentioned Baldy, you mentioned the losses of Hayden and Swathi. I think not having Carlos Alarba on this roster this past series is a major loss. Carlos is someone, as someone who's worked with Houston last summer. Carlos is such a calming presence on the field for this entire team, because at the end of the day, this team is super young. And I think that is very telling sometimes. And that's what excites me about the fact that this team showed up for as young as they are, for an influx of brand new players that they got. They were able to then still hold their own against a Kansas City. And again, if this is what the baseline is, I'm very excited for what Houston could do going forward.
Yeah, and I thought Houston's beaters did better than we might have feared with Paul Martinez gone. Sam Regan coming back as a beater had a very strong series. I thought Kevin Raver played very well as well. Kaylee Duvall as well. All three of them, like, control was relatively fluid in this game, all three games, and they were doing kind of the right things. And it was just frustrating the number of times that the beaters did something right and the chasers just kind of made a mistake or threw the possession away, and that kind of cost. Pieces are there, as you were getting at. It's just kind of, they have the whole season, right? They've already qualified for champs because there's only 4 teams in the South. They can use the rest of the season to experiment, to get better, to improve that cohesion and chemistry. and possibly make that run at championships that they've been talking about doing for a long time. But, to go back to the team that won the series and got the sweep, Kansas City, just so impressive to be able to grit out game 2 after they won game 1, kind of running away, and then League City really threw their best punch in game 2. Kansas City actually needed the flag grab to come back into that game, and it comes down to that golden goal. They got great stuff out of Nibs, who's making his debut for Kansas City, and had a lot of transition goals, including the big one to kind of seal game 2. And I thought no Lauren Curry in the beater game. Their beaters, as I said, probably played League City to about a draw, but the coordination between Kansas City's beaters and chasers was better than the coordination between League City's beaters and chasers. The beaters were consistently setting up good things for the chasers to do. And the chasers did a good job capitalizing on the turnovers the beaters caused. So I think overall, just the better cohesion between the beater game and chasing game is what kind of carried the day for Kansas City.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about Team India's Seeker 1, put some respect in his name, Ben. He is him, right? Neves, my goat, went out there and caught 2 flag runners pretty quickly, might I add. I think that's where, like, my biggest takeaway in terms of just a general observation is I think Houston is kicking themselves for potentially not focusing their beaters on flag runner more, or it's one of those things where maybe you slow it down to give your seeker the chance to catch that flag runner first. Or maybe, again, this is where maybe like 2 seasons ago, I think Ethan Stern put out a podcast that was talking about doing the 2-for-1 during flag runner on pitch situations. Sometimes we really focus on trying to get as many goals on the board as possible, but maybe they could have said, hey, we have about 30 seconds left, 45 seconds left. Who cares if we give up a goal? We can catch the flag runner very quickly. And now you're making a play for the flag runner and taking that risk of saying, hey, because we know it's a weaker flag runner, we're going to give up a goal to get control back so that we can then go +1. Because even if you're down 2, right, give up a goal, catch that flag runner, now it's still a tie game. And I think that sort of thing is what Houston could – again, it's all about experimentation at this point. No matter what they do, they're making champs, and I'm excited to see what they could do. They have a bunch of players that are very physical. I think that's something we can always come to expect for Houston, and we'll just see how it goes.
Yeah, so I think we're not able to bring in Lauren due to some technical challenges. So congrats to her and congrats to the team on the sweep. And as we were discussing, there's only 4 teams in the division here. Kansas City has probably punched their ticket to the quarterfinals already by winning the series. They still have to beat that short rostered Austin team. They still have their series against San Antonio, but they're probably looking at going straight through to the quarterfinals and MLQ champs. And I think there's a lot to be excited about on that front, because this looks like a very different team than last year's team, but a really exciting one. And then I think that takes us through the series of the last 3 weeks. So let's talk quickly before we wrap up about the coming schedule. So this weekend ahead of us, we have Minneapolis against Detroit. Some roster turnover in a good way for Minnesota coming into the season. And then Detroit obviously having one major loss with Leo Fried now back on New York. What are you looking for in that series?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Leo. I'm also thinking about the loss of Jack Levy as coach. And we talked about how having a non-playing coach is very important on the sideline. And Jack's been a staple of that Detroit program. And the loss of having him on the sideline is massive. And obviously that doesn't take away from what Leo does on the field. So I think the question marks going into Detroit for a lot of people was, who is this team without Leo Fried? And are we the problem when it comes to the narratives that we push? Because maybe this team isn't all about Leo. Maybe they are able to take those next couple steps and really just go out there and build upon the success that they've had. And I think with Minneapolis, it's very much continue to take on the influx of college players that you've been able to do the last couple seasons and bring them into the success that TCQC has had the past couple seasons and really mesh it together. And we talk about how they picked up Ryan Mejio. I'm pretty sure they have Bitsy Archibald now, ? I could be wrong. Yeah, pretty sure they do. So it's one of those things where how are you going to take on these brand new players coming into a MLQ program now? So we'll see how that goes. And then obviously we have Boston versus Charlotte. And this is a question mark because again, we for 3 or 4 seasons now, we've really talked about how this might be the year that Charlotte does it. Every year they've not been able to take that step, but I think this is the year that they legitimately have a shot at playing for the 2 seed in the East. And so we'll see how that goes from Charlotte. And with Boston, we'll see if the maybe the fall off isn't as drastic as we thought it would be. They did graduate a ton of players. They have a brand new coach now, so we'll have to see if the changes that they've made are going to reflect either positively or negatively, and we'll see how that goes. And all of that can be answered, I think, next week.
Yeah, I think with Boston, this roster still looks very strong if you just look at the names on it. I think the names that are missing from last year loom large in people's minds, and there's the buzz about certain players on this roster maybe not actually making it to any series. So we have to see who they actually bring. But on paper, there's still a ton of talent on this group. I think you would still project it as the number 2 team in the division easily. But we have to see what actually happens when they show up. New players, a lot of players having to step into bigger roles with some of the departures that you alluded to. Where Charlotte is kind of bringing back the same core of players, and just every year the hope is they get a little bit better. Last year we saw they came in 4th as usual, but were competitive with Washington, nearly beat Washington in the play-in bracket at championships before they kind of let that game slip through their fingers. Is this year they finally put it together and are competitive with Boston, Washington, and can kind of make that shot for number 2. It's just interesting that people have kind of started to wonder about Boston before we even seen them play, because I think the names on that roster are still quite strong. There's the potential for them to really just blow Charlotte out of the water if they play at their absolute peak. But if they're struggling to figure things out, if they're trying to integrate those new players, if people are not able to step into the roles we're hoping to, and if Charlotte has taken a step forward like it seems they do every year, then that could be a really competitive series. All right. I think that does it for week 1 of MLQ Replay. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.